Well, let's bring you more now on the Chinese People's Liberation Army and in particular its role in Africa. I'm joined in studio by Delano Kilolongwe, a security expert with the Protective and Safety Association of Kenya. Always a pleasure to have you with us, Delano. Of course, we know that China is the only permanent member of the UN Security Council that is often contributing peacekeeping forces to missions in Africa. What do you make of this level of involvement?
The level of involvement of China is very high. There are other permanent Security Council members who do contribute, but the outstanding item that shows here is China's commitment to Africa as a whole. And this is historical, Lindy, because for a long time now, China has had economic interests in Africa. China has become Africa's largest trading partner. And as a result of that, you have a lot of Chinese companies in Africa, we have a lot of Chinese citizens in Africa, but the partnerships have spread across the divide and now also include security relationships. There's been also a lot of trade. There's over $1 billion worth of military equipment that has been purchased by African governments every single year for the last few years in Africa. So the increased presence of Chinese peacekeeping troops is also an indication of China's larger commitment and wider commitment to international security, domestic security as well, because in terms of China being able to sustain its role globally, a large number of resources and supplies do come from Africa. So it is of strategic interest for China to make sure that Africa remains peaceful and remains very stable. China is one of the largest consumers, for example, of energy resources from the African continent in the form of oil out of Sudan and previously also out of Libya. So definitely there is a very strong reason for China to keep its peacekeeping missions going strong. It does contribute in a different way to Africa. Yes. And I think the resolve of the Chinese as far as Africa is concerned is of great note.
A vested interest then, as you're saying. But of course, probably one of the most significant developments is the new logistics center that is now going to be in Djibouti. We're starting to get a clearer image of what its mandate will be exactly. From your understanding, how will it enhance that cooperation when it comes to peace and stability in Africa?
First of all, remember the key thing, especially when you're looking at a continent as large as Africa. You know, you could take China, continental China, you could also take India, and you could take Europe and fit them easily into the African continent. That's how large Africa is. So you do need a logistics base to be able to coordinate the activities all around the continent. Now, it's a very small logistics base. It's not yet a full military base per se. It doesn't have the big, port that you would expect of such a facility. It does have some underground facilities. It does look like it is pretty much advanced in terms of technology. And if we look at things like the perimeter wall, which is 8 meters wide, we then realize that this is a base that has a serious intention, probably for the future. But in order for China and the PLA to be able to scale up its operations, it does need to have one nerve center, one node that helps with communications between mainland China as well as its field bases across Africa and any potential troops or equipment or air support or naval support that it is running around the continent. So Djibouti serves perfectly because it's a nexus, it's a nerve center. All the undersea fiber cable that's running into Africa runs from there. And you can run operations real time between mainland China and Djibouti. So strategically, Djibouti plays an important role across the continent. It's also part of the channel that comes into the European side through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, and down the eastern seaboard. It's very easy to access via the Indian Ocean, any of the ports that China would need to support in terms of military logistics.
And you mentioned earlier just the extent of China's commitment to Africa as seen in peace and security investments. How do you think Africa can best take advantage of this? How does Africa now engage with China as far as peace and security is concerned?
The first thing, Lindy, that African nations need to do and African leaders need to do is, first of all, to embrace the fact that there's somebody here who's willing to offer support in this very key area of security. And I think that should be the first approach, is first of all to embrace, to accept that there is a willing partner here that is saying we are ready and willing to help you. And the next thing that they need to do is African nations as a whole need to accept the learnings from the People's Liberation Army in terms of military, defense, general security operations, police, technology, especially in the areas, the key specific specialization areas of medical in military terms, and logistics in military terms, as well as even key items like dealing with landmines or IEDs, potential things like that, would be of very key and specific nature in terms of helping many African nations. A lot of African nations have taken and adopted a position where they're simply going out and, you know, purchasing equipment. They're not customizing, they're not looking at what are their threats, their risks, and analyzing that against how they need to go. So a mature nation like China does help very much in terms of helping to sensitize, if they're given the time to spend with these budding nations, these developing nations in terms of military and defense.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for that analysis. Delano Kililongwe live here in our Nairobi studios.